Okay, welcome everyone. It's really amazing to have a full table over here that we're maxing out our capacity. So I just want to thank everyone who's here. Of course, people are on the computer, but of course, those who also made the effort to be here in person. We're doing this in partnership with the Federation, which is asking Jewish communal organizations, which includes shuls, to really come into the shuls at night, because this was a night, Kristallnacht, where we're basically being run out of our buildings. And so it's important that we actually take a night, even though it's not always easy, to make an extra effort to be here in the building, using our Jewish buildings and organizations, and dedicating them for the Jewish purposes. And of course, what we're going to be learning tonight is our regular Gemara shir that we're going to continue with, but it's important to just orient ourselves that, why is it that we survive? Oh, Erwin, welcome. See right over there. I'll have to get another photo at the end now to include you in it. But we don't just survive. Of course, as Jews, we love, we love eating our cholent, and we love go swimming in the JCC pool. And there's like a lot of benefits that come along the way with being a Jew. But ultimately, the reason what gives us the resolve to survive is not just for the sake of surviving, but to do something productive with being a Jew. And one of the most productive and unique things that we have, of course, is the study of Torah that has been with us throughout of our exile. While today we're blessed to have Eretz Yisrael back, and we can go to the land of Israel, and the Jewish state is being built over there. What really kept us going throughout the exile, and what keeps us going today, is our commitment to the Word of God, which is His Torah, and our study of the Talmud, which is the elucidation of the written law. So what we're going to be learning tonight is continuing in our studies of Megillah on Chaf Daled Amud Beis on 24b. And we're actually in the middle of studying a section which talks about the laws. We're talking about the laws of Torah reading, but then we continue to talk about the laws of those who serve as a shliach tzibor, who is fit to serve as the chazan, as the person who is leading davening on behalf of everyone else. So we're literally at the top of 24b, all the way at the top. And what we learned is that there's a guy called a pocheach. A pocheach, Poris al Shema. Pocheach is somebody, it's a debate in the medieval commentaries, but a pocheach essentially is somebody who, if someone comes during the week, let's say on Shabbos, you don't really have this issue, but someone comes during the week and they want to lead davening. So there's a dress code actually we have. Now, where I grew up, you had to have a hat and jacket and everything, button-down shirt and whatnot. Here we're not as strict, but we do have standards, and the standard is that the gentleman leading davening has to not be wearing shorts. He has to wear pants. This isn't just an arbitrary rule that we made up in 21st century America, but this is actually something that comes back to the times of the Gemara. A bocheach was someone who either his legs were not completely covered, or it could be referring to someone who might be wearing a torn shirt, or his arms are not completely covered. So, my generation growing up, at least, apparently was the in thing to wear ragged clothing, torn clothing, so it appears as if you can't afford a proper, pair of clothing to wear. Apparently that's stylish to look like you can't afford a pair of clothing. So that's what some people would do back then, apparently, also, and that would disqualify them from leading davening.
I thought is it roke?
A pocheach.
Oh, pocheach. Oh.
Yeah, not like perfumer or.
Yeah.
What is the translation of that word?
Yeah, so there's
not a balkora.
No, yeah.
The person with stopwatch.
So yeah, it basically, it's a debate about what it exactly refers to. Rashi gets into the etymology of it,
Yeah.
But essentially someone who's not dressed properly for davening cannot lead. So, here at shul, we're not going to, if someone comes in, many people come in with shorts for davening, we don't have security escorting them out. We don't even have any security here. That's a separate discussion. But we don't have security escorting anyone out. But if someone wants to be the shliach tzibor, what does shliach tzibor mean? It means you are the agent of the congregation, the messenger, right? Very good. The messenger of the congregation. Well, if you want to be the representative, leading the congregation, representing them to God, you got to dress the part as well.
Right.
So the question that came up in the Gemara is, "Ba'imine ula bar Rav me'abai." Question was, "Katabocheach ma'u shikra b'torah." So the question is, can a child who's not dressed, in a full pair of pants, let's say, can he get up there and read from the Torah. So this is assuming a child can read from the Torah in general. We learned previously, a Brisa taught that in theory, a child actually could read from the Torah, but we're going to bring in the concept we keep seeing. It's not kavod hatzibor. It's not respectable that the congregation should have to be kafaf, should have to defer to the child to lead on their behalf. One of the arguments that's made is that actually there's a debate that if a child doesn't have, let's say a kid becomes bar mitzvah, right? So some kids, when they come bar mitzvah, you go especially to like the Sephardic communities, like they look like grown men before when they hit 8 years old or something. But you go like the Ashkenazi communities, many times like the young boys, when they hit bar mitzvah, they like get up there and say, today I'm a man, and then meanwhile they still look like they're that 8-year-old. So the question is, if the kid didn't yet hit puberty and didn't like really grow any facial hair, can he lead davening? And so the Bach, I believe, is of the opinion that a child should not lead davening, certainly should not be the established chazan, because why? Well, think about it. If you were going to put him in front of Melech Basar B'Dam, you're going to put him in front of a politician, in front of the mayor or somebody just to intercede on behalf of the Jewish people. Are you going to pick a 13-year-old boy who, still has his voice cracking and doesn't have any facial hair yet? We love people of all ages regardless, but if we're not going to put that kid up there to represent us to a human king, certainly achas kama kama, not before the Melech Malchi Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not before God. So anyway, that's a little bit of background information. So the question is, Amrle, Dibalach Arum, you should really be asking, well, why are you asking if a child, right? So we just asked, can a child who's not dressed in full pants, can he read from the Torah? So Amarle, we're on the 4th line, you should really ask about what, at that point, why can't just an adult who's nude, why can't he just lead davening or read from the Torah? So Arum my time alone, well, of course, why is Phyllis, welcome. Let me get you a chair.
Okay.
Here, let me get you something.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Here you are. I think there's room right over here.
Thank you.
So the question is, thank you, Judd. Why is it that why is it someone who's new cannot lead? So the reason is Mishum Kavadat Sibor, because of course it's an affront to the dignity of everyone who has to be present while this person is not being dressed. So Hachanami Mishum Kavadat Sibor, likewise, a child who's not dressed appropriately certainly cannot lead davening for everyone. Forget about his age for a moment. If he's not dressed appropriately, he can't lead for the congregation, because it's really two things. One is that it's an affront to God, but it's also the angle we don't always think about is that it's an affront to the dignity of the congregation. Why should this person who's not dressed appropriately be representing me? I didn't elect this guy. I didn't vote for this guy at the polls. So we have to have some basic standards. Okay, that's part number 1. The next part, the Gemara is going to further analyze the Mishnah right now. Summa poris al Shema. So we mentioned that someone who is blind can actually recite even the first blessing of Shema. Does anyone remember, why would I think someone who's blind could not recite the first blessing of Shema? Certainly not on behalf of the congregation. What do we say in that first blessing of Shema?
That he's doing it by memory, not by looking at.
Oh, so very good. So that's a good point for when we talk about Kriyas HaTorah, Lloyd. When we are talking about Torah reading, it's essential that you actually look at the text. So you are correct that someone who is blind would not be able to do Torah reading for the congregation because of that. But when it comes to the bracha of Shema, though, we don't actually need to read it from the text if someone knows it well enough. But that's true for Torah reading. Why would I think someone who's blind would not be able to read the first bracha for the congregation? What's in the text?
I think what you had mentioned was that the last letter of Shema is the ayin. Is that where we're going with aid?
Oh, that's
God and aid.
Oh, interesting. I didn't. Oh, interesting. I didn't think about that.
Oh, I thought you had said it.
Oh well, I'll tell you what I did. I'll tell you what I did say. Oh, Alina.
Why would the sight be when you can say, hear, O Israel? You feel you're being heard. Israel.
Right. So that's about hearing. So if we go a little bit before Shema, though, so Shema is already a little bit later, but the first blessing is about Yotzer HaMa'oros, in which we praise God for creating the luminaries, for creating light. So exactly. If he can't, how can he make the blessing, bless God on creating light, if he never saw light to begin
Yes.
with. Now, Yehuda says if he was someone who gradually became blind at some other point in life, well, at least he saw light at some point, and he has a context of what to praise God for. But someone who never saw light, how is he praising God for making light? So that's Tanya Amru Lo Rabbi Yehuda. There are many people who try to figure out. There's the Merkava and Yecheskel, which is a really interesting prophecy, and people try to make sense of this. There's all sorts of interesting things that Yecheskel says over there, the chariot, but no one's ever seen what he describes. So yet they could still darshan, they could still explain what Yecheskel is talking about. Also, just finish this line. So what was Rabbi Yehuda answer? Rabbi Yehuda says, Hasam ba'avanta deliba tolya milsa v'hakamecha v'yada. When studying a piece of Torah, like studying something like the Merkava, it's possible I've never seen in my life. I know some of you are like Sunday morning folks. We've been talking about Avodah Zarah for a while. So when we talk about idols, I don't have to, Moshe Kurtz, I don't have to know every single idol out there to understand what Judaism has to say about idols. Someone doesn't have to engage in the act of theft to understand what theft is. You don't have to engage in the act of eating, eating pig to know that eating pig is usser. It's conceptual, it's intellectual. However, hacha mishum hanahu. However, Rabbi Yehuda believes that the initial blessing of Shema, that we praise God for creating light, is not simply just, it's a blessing in which we are deriving hana. We thank God for giving us light. But if someone's blind and they never benefited from light, how could they recite a blessing like that? Rabbi Yehuda says.
What about Birkat HaShachar? Can blind persons say it? As a shliach tzibur?
Right. So it'd be the same. I think it'd be the same
Yes,
question there
yeah.
as well. I believe it would be the same machlokis there as well, Marina. Yeah, Lloyd.
Question is, what do they mean by divide? How do you divide, as I understand the word divide to mean?
Oh, divide Shema you're talking about?
Yeah, the Shema, how do you divide it up?
Yeah, so what's describing is a really weird thing that we don't do these days. You're right to ask about this, being Porei Sal Shema. What's it mean? I guess in our scroll they translate as dividing Shema. So what does it mean to be Porei Sal Shema? So what happened is, you'll see this actually sometimes, someone will come in late for the evening prayer, someone will come in late for Mariv, so they missed Baruch Hu at the beginning. So after the last mourner's Kaddish, someone will say Baruch Hu Es Hashem Vorach, and then everyone answers. Back then, they would do a little bit more, especially if there was like a minion's worth of men that were late. So then they'd be Poris al Shema, which basically consisted of saying Baruch Hu, but also of saying the first blessing of Shema. Now you're going to ask, well, what's so special about the first blessing of Shema? The answer is because in that first blessing of Shema, it has Kedusha in there. We say Kadosh, 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 and we also say Baruch Kavod Hashem in Komo. So since we say those things, we say Kedusha in the Shema, those are things that we call Dvarim Sheb Kedusha. There are certain things that require a minyan, otherwise it's forbidden to say them. A good example of that is Kaddish. You need 10 men in order to say Kaddish. That's why whenever we were just we were at a funeral recently, so Judd helped us out. We had a funeral recently and we gathered some men together because they wanted to say Kaddish at the funeral. Rightfully so. You should be able to say Kaddish at a funeral. So, every now and then we have to do a little bit of recruiting. It's very important. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the thing is, this is only Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbanan Islay Hana. But the Rabbanan will say, is there really Hana? Because the sheet of the Rabbanan is that even a blind person can recite this blessing. So how do Rabbanan make sense of it? Why would a blind person be able to recite the first blessing of Shema if he doesn't actually benefit from the light? Well, we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by benefit from the light? Is that what you're going to get to?
No, he does benefit because other people can see him.
Ah, very good, very good. And that's the answer of the Gemara. It's a little bit of a long-winded answer. You're very concise, but the Gemara elaborates with a story. Kar Yossi, the Tanya, I'm Rav Yossi. Rav Yossi said, Kol yemei ha'yisi mitzdar al mikra zeh. All the days of my life, I struggle to understand the following verse. That you will be kind of, I don't know what the right word is, like scrounging around, trying to feel around where you are. You'll be disoriented like during the noontime, like a blind person in absolute darkness. Now, the question we can ask on this verse is, what's the difference? If you're blind, what's the difference whether it's noontime or whether it's midnight? It doesn't make a difference. You can't see anything anyway. I did not understand this verse until the following story occurred. One time I was going in the dark of night, and I saw a blind person walking along the way in the dark of night, and he held a torch in his hand. Amartilo, I said to him, Bini, avuka zolamalach, why do you need this torch over here? What's that going to do for you? You're blind. Amarli, he responded, Kol zman shavuka biyadi bnei adam ronosi umatzianosi min habchasin min hakutzin min haberkanim. Because as long as I have the torch in my hands, like Erwin said, I can't see anything with this torch, but other people will see me and they'll be able to protect me and save me from going into a thicket of thorns or falling into a hole somewhere. And so what do we see from this story? That even if I personally am not benefiting, I don't see the light directly myself, by me having the light, I indirectly benefit because others are able to see me and they're able to help me in my difficulty as well. So that's why even if someone is blind, they will still recite that bracha nonetheless. That's the sheet of the Rabbanan, and I'm pretty sure that's how we paskin halacha. That's what we do practically. Okay, very good. That brings us to the Mishnah. Anything we could clarify before going on to the next section?
Going back to the beginning, we were talking about the clothing aspect.
Mm-hmm.
With that wouldn't apply to a summer camp where kids are
Right.
wearing shorts and they're probably leaving their own minyan for their group or whatever it is.
So Judd asked a great question on a practical halachic level. Like, what happens? I remember when I was working at Mosheva one summer. So I used to I was until then very good about getting into long pants for davening. But eventually the schedule was so tight and we're coming like straight from the baseball field or we're on a trip and we're like in the middle of a hike and like you're just like, it's not practical. You're not like traveling with a pair of pants. So you daven in shorts. Mm-hmm. So Rav Melamed in Pnei Halacha, he actually addresses this question about people who live on a yishuv. People who live, out there in the communities, in the kibbutz in Israel, and they're out there in the sweltering heat in the summer. So he actually paskins, and this is a great source to know, because I don't know how many people get behind this. He says that if the norm of the community is that people will wear shorts, even when a dignitary comes, if that's just the culture of the area, because it's 120 degrees outside, then it would be, acceptable for davening as well, even for the guy leading davening, arguably. So I guess the question is, if an MK from the Knesset comes over to visit them, are they changing into pants or will they still be in their shorts? If they'll be in their shorts, then fine. But if they're going to get all dressed up for the MK, then why don't they at least get dressed up, half as good for when they're davening to Hashem? So that's the point basically that he makes. So on a nice level. Yeah.
One more thing. What is a barasa?
What?
Baraita.
Brisa. So basically, there's two main texts we're dealing with over here. So we have the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is from the Tanai, and these are the earlier sages. Mishnah is codified about year 200 or give or take. Then later we have the Gemara, which is the commentary on the Mishnah by Amoraim, which is about a few hundred years later. So the Mishnah kind of is where we derive rabbinic law from. So the Mishnah gets further processed and elucidated by the Gemara, and both are actually contained here on this page. A brisa is kind of also from the era of the Tanaim, also roughly in that year 200 or early area, but it did not make it into the Mishnah. So think of Mishnah as canon, and then the brisa is also something we respect. But if there's ever like a conflict between a Mishnah and a brisa, we take the Mishnah generally because that's canon. But in general, we assume that what the sages say in the Mishnah and in the brisos, which are the non-canonical texts, we assume that they should be in harmony with each other. So many times we'll cite a brisa in support of a Mishnah, And sometimes we will also ask, like, wait, this Mishnah and this Brisa seem to be in contradiction with each other, and we'll try to resolve that when we can. So basically, both the Mishnah and Brisa are earlier stages, and then the Gemara, which is what we're doing right now, is later. But actually, what we're about to get to right now, as you see, is the Mishnah. So we're going back a few hundred years, and then following that, the Gemara will elaborate upon the Mishnah. So that's there we go. Good general history. That's good to know. Okay. So here we go. Next Mishnah. This Mishnah is going to talk about Birchas Kohanim. It's going to talk about Duchening. Who are any Kohanim over here?
Yeah, right here.
Well, we got my grandfather. Oh, we got Lonnie also. Okay, so pay extra special attention to this. Kohen sheyesh biyadav mumin lo yisa eskapav. If a Kohen has a deformity in his hand, we'll talk about what that is. He cannot duchen. He cannot lead the blessing of the Kohanim. Rayud Omer. Even if someone has his hands colored with a dye, it's either a red dye or a blue dye, depending how you understand. But basically, he has colors. He went to a painting class that day, and his hands are covered in all these different colors. Lo yisas kapav, he should not lift up his hands. Why? Because everyone's going to wind up staring at him.
Makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Well, the issue is we don't want
Not
people.
supposed to look at all.
Well, that's precisely the point. The
Yeah,
point is
should
that
see
we
that.
don't want people to get curious and start looking at his hands. So we don't want to put anything up there that might tempt somebody, right?
But if you're supposed to look at the Kohen while he's doing it,
Ah.
it shouldn't matter whether he has green hands, purple hands.
Right, you shouldn't look
or
anyway.
Whatever.
So the question is, can one really not look? See,
Sure.
we'll hear, the Rashi quotes the Gemara here in Chagiga. So anyone wants to look on the side, Rashi, I believe, quotes that Gemara. Yeah. So Rashi says, Afisha am istaklimbo, because everyone's going to stare at him. Varmim b'meseches Chagiga, hamistakbo han b'shash notzins kapehan, einav kohos v'isha shchina shura al yadehan. So if you look up at the Kohanim, this is where we all hear, everyone thinks as a kid that if the Kohanim are putting up their hands and you peek from under the talus, all of a sudden there's gonna be like a blast of radiation that comes down and knocks you off your feet. We all have like what was it?
Maidens of the Lost
Yeah,
Ark.
exactly. Like you're just gonna like melt on the spot. So it actually, the origin of the idea is from the Talmud itself, from a Gemara in Chagiga, which shows that if you look at their hands, your eyes will become weaker because of it. So I don't know if getting higher prescription glasses correlates to how many times you look at the Kohanim. But the truth is, Tosfos actually in Chagiga questions this application. Basically, the assumption is that nowadays it's not true. When did this apply? This is referring to when the Kohanim were in the temple and they actually invoked what they call the Shema Mefurash, which is a very special, very long name of God that we've lost. In fact, actually, it had special properties. It can make you forget things. It's what Moshe Rabbeinu, what Moses uses when he basically kills the Egyptian. So he uses the Shem HaMefurash, he uses the special name of God, and that's actually what he uses to kill the Egyptian there on the spot.
That's the Tetragrammaton.
Well, that's Yod-Kei Vav-Kei. So this is a separate
Even
name.
more.
Yeah, it's like was it 70 letters or so.
I'm
So
always
Moshe, when we duck and our hands are covered with the towel.
Vary when they're being blessed.
If they don't
Oh,
know that.
well, I'll get to that in just a moment. Actually, why? Yeah, Zadie, sorry, did you say something?
I was saying, yes, when we're ducking, our hands are covered with the towels. You can't see the hands when they have
Extra
dye
level,
on their
right?
hands.
Extra level of protection. Very good.
Mm.
So, well, Phyllis says sometimes.
They should- Yeah.
Wait,
they should-
wait,
they
how would you know? That is messing. Okay, so here it is. But that's in the Beis Hamikdash when we're using what's called the Shema Mefurash, a very special name of God. Nowadays, we're not using the Shema Mefurash, and it's not in the Beis Hamikdash. So why then can't we look? So some understand that it's kind of maybe a Zecher LaMikdash. We're just commemorating that which was done back in the temple, which means that if you do look, you shouldn't worry about, Raiders of the Lost Ark happening and melting on the spot. Some would say, and it's what Tosfos, another medieval commentary, suggests, is that it's just because you don't want to get distracted. it's actually important. You're supposed to be paying attention. It's not just we think oftentimes that Yisraelim, we play a passive role, but we're actually supposed to be concentrating on what the Kohanim are saying. So even if you're someone like me who, brings a sefer to davening with him and will sometimes get distracted, you should put that sefer, or if you're reading the Jewish, I'm not condoning bringing the newspaper into shul to begin with, but if you have the Jewish link with you, definitely a time to put it down for Birchas Kohanim and to concentrate. So what's the issue of all these different colors on the hands? Well, the point is it shouldn't be a distraction for you. So that applies whether you're in the Beis HaMikdash or whether you're here at a Go to Shalom, which is the next to best thing. Okay. All right. So yeah, there you go. Big plug. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir though. All right. So take a look in the Gemara over here. Now the Gemara is going to elaborate what we just learned. So Tana, Mumin Shamar Befanav Yodav Araglav. The Brisa tells us that not only does this apply to a deformity of the hand, but if there's a deformity of the face or the feet, that's also problematic. The reason is because, well, those are the things that are in theory exposed are the hands and the feet. The Kohanim take off their shoes. They didn't wear socks back then. The funny thing is, by the way, you know how you take it off and there's not supposed to be a distraction. That's the point. So the funny thing is you go to some places like the Five Towns. It's too bad Toby's not here. She's usually the person I look for Five Towns references. But and like sometimes more like yeshivish place or like in you go like Flatbush. So because the gentlemen usually wear like black and white clothing, this is like when I went to a black hat school, you had to wear a white shirt, black pants. But what they didn't put into the dress code was what color your socks had to be. So everyone would come with like the craziest like colored socks, and then like the Kohanim love doing that when they get up there for Birchas Kohanim, like, oh, look at my socks, and I'm like, yeah, that's specifically what you're not supposed to do because it's not supposed to be a distraction from Birchas Kohanim. So if you are a Kohen, make sure to wear a black pair of socks and nothing that's gonna call anyone's attention. Anyway, I digress. I'm Rabbi Yeshua Ben Levi, Yadav behokanios. So what are hokanios? So that's if your hands are spotted. Lo yisa eskapov. Likewise, you shouldn't raise your hands. Tani nami hachi. Here we go. We have a brisa that supports this point. Yadav behokanios lo yisa eskapov. Good. Also, akumos or akushos lo yisa eskapov. If the hands are deformed, like they are bent back or bent to the side in a malformed way, we're also concerned that will serve as a distraction. Amar Avasi, Chifani ubeishani lo yisas kapav. Anyone who's from Haifa or from Beishan, they should not raise their hands. So we can see there's some sort of I don't know if you call it racism or some sort of territorial discrimination going on over here. Tanyanami hachi, and we have a brisa that actually supports this assertion. Emo ridilfnei ativa lo anshi beishav lo anshi beischaifa lo anshi tivonin. I don't know where tivonin is. Anyone know where that is? Anyone's been on a tour in Israel recently, or I don't know where it is either. But Beishan and Haifa, Beishan is up north, I think more to the east, and Haifa, of course, is on the coast, which is northwest. So, okay, well, what do we have against these people? Is this like a war of aggression over here between the south and the north? What's going on over here? So rather, I thought you liked that one, because they mix up the sound of an aleph and an ayin, and they mispronounce it, which is really funny because I don't know the difference between an aleph and an ayin. I mean, when you hear Svardim, the Svardim will usually pronounce that difference.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, exactly. It's like more of a guttural. I can't do it.
A couple of years ago, Jay Jubik was doing the iron when he was lame, and then he backed off of it after maybe about 3 or 4 times doing it.
Is it too
It's
taxing?
It's guttural.
It's very taxing on you for doing
imagine,
it. Yeah, but he was doing it for good shtick.
But he's not smart.
Right. I mean, he probably, I'm sure he's like a chassid of Rabbi Weider. Also, Rabbi Weider also is like the most like white Ashkenazi person you can be, but he likes doing that in his later. But the point being is that you have to. So the Mishnah Berurah actually writes that nowadays, no worries. Since nobody knows the difference between aleph and ayin, it's not going to be distracting in any way. Therefore, everybody any male Kohen can serve.
Those both letters are silent unless there's a nikudot, a vowel.
Right. So let's say
Right.
you put like a pasach, an ah sound under it. So the aleph sound would sound different when you go ah, and the ayin would be again more of like a guttural. I could pretend to try to do it, but I won't do it right. Like an ah, like you're using more of the throat for it. All right, well, we'll have to get a Sephardian residents to come in here and do a demonstration for us. Now that we have a Sephardic minion, we could
Yeah,
pull them in.
yeah.
Are
Look-
there any ions in the bracha, the Kohanic blessings?
Well,
I
there
think
are.
so.
They're definitely olives.
Olives.
So if you're pronouncing olives and it's ions, then Yair.
Olive.
Olives you don't
Yeah,
change,
yeah.
it's the ion. that-
Well, no, the Gemara says that they would just mix both of them.
Yeah.
They would pronounce some olives and ions also.
Oh,
Yeah.
if they mix them, that's.
Yeah, so they're just kind of indiscriminately using those sounds. Okay, so a related story. Amalei Rav Chiya Rav Shimon bar Rebbe. Emaliata Levi Pasulata min haducha mishum da'avi kalecha. So I don't know why there must have been some beef between these two rabbis. Rav Chiya said to Rav Shimon bar Rebbe, if you were a Levi, you would be puzzled, you'd be disqualified from singing in the temple. That was the job of the Levium. They would sing in the temple. So you'd be disqualified. Why? Because your voice is too thick. Your voice is too heavy. Whatever that means. There's, because their job is to sing, you have to make sure, sometimes during davening, there'll be, when someone like starts a tune for Kedusha, like, and then there's like one guy's like, and there's like one guy, and then like it sounds terrible because everyone's like on different keys. So, there's a need to make sure that everyone's in sync with each other. So they had certain regulations for who could serve as a Levi. But anyway, this seemed like a gratuitous slight because he wasn't even a Levi. So why would he say something like that to him? So Asa Amrli Levua. Rav Shimon bar Rebbe goes to his father Rebbe and reports what he was told. Amarle, Rebbe says back to him, Zeal Amale, go back to him and tell him, well, you think you're so great with your voice, but you don't know how to pronounce words correctly. When you get to the words, and I pine, I hope for the Lord. Are you not going to come out sounding like a blasphemer? Why? So I'll tell you outside what Rashi says. So chikisi, this one we see more today. Sometimes people have a hard time distinguishing between a hey and a ches, doing the chus sound. So apparently this, who was it? Rabbi Chia had a difficulty pronouncing the chus sound of a ches. So when he got to the pasuk v'chikisi lahashem, instead of a ch, it was v'chikisi or v'kesi, and which sounds like hitting. God forbid. So that's blasphemy. Rather than saying, I hope, I pine for God, he's saying, I'm hitting God. And that's certainly blasphemy. So he says, like, don't start critiquing. He basically says, like, listen, Rabbi Chia, don't start critiquing the quality of people's voices. Like the way you read the Torah, you're not only mispronouncing something, but the way you pronounce it actually comes out as straight up blasphemy. So you shouldn't be talking over. So basically it's a lesson, not to throw stones from glass houses. Okay. Where does that bring us to? Here, this next section goes relatively quickly. It's all the same idea. Amar Avuna, Zavlagan Laisas Kappa, someone who has a lot of tears, who cries a lot. He should not be raising his hands to do duchening. But there was a guy who actually lived in the not residence, in the town of Rav Huna, and he was a crier, and he still went up anyway. So Hahu Dedash Be'irahav, and the answer is people knew him. He was like, the town crier. We have a WhatsApp group called the town crier. So he was a town crier, right? He was known like that. So nobody was fazed when he went up. No one's like, well, where's all that crying coming from? Like, they knew this is Yasala the crier. Okay.
I don't understand what the purpose for. Why not? What's wrong with
The
that?
concern is that he'll be a distraction.
But he's not supposed to look certainly at his face.
Well, no,
His hands is one thing.
Well, I think you also are. I think in addition to that, you're also hearing him cry. But yeah, the same question. But we said because when you're outside of the Beis Hamikdash, which is what we're assuming, there's really no isser to look at the Kohanim. The isser of looking at the Kohanim, like the prohibition, is when we're in the Beis Hamikdash. But here, on a technical level, there's no real prohibition. According to some, there's maybe a D'Rabbanan. There's no real prohibition to look at the Kohanim nowadays. What we're doing is we're trying to prevent a distraction. We're trying to commemorate the days of yore in the temple. We're recreating it. We're reenacting it. But in theory, you could look at it. If
Well,
you
you know, you could use the same argument and say, since we don't have the base on Megillah, why do they have to hold their hands like this? Why can't they just do this?
Yeah. I mean, look, we're
You know.
a lot of what we're doing is recreating what was done in the Beis HaMikdash. You're right.
So by crying, it's, I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, Tani Nami Haki Zalvagal Isas Kabavim Hayadash V'Yer Mutter. Basically, same thing. A brisa supports this statement that if everyone knows it's Yasla the crier, no one's going to be fazed or distracted by it. A similar idea. Arav Yochanan Suma Ba'achas Me'inav. If someone is blind in one of his eyes. Some of Harshim commentaries understand that if he's blind in both of his eyes, Lo Yizas Kapav. Because when someone's blind, you can usually, there's something off with their eyes. You can see it. There's a blind person or blind in one eye in the town of Rabbi Yochanan, and no one stopped him from duchening. So the answer is, everyone knew him as the one, the guy with the blind eye in town. A brisa that says exactly the same thing, that if people are accustomed to seeing him, they're not going to be fazed by him. Finally, one last line before the Mishnah, Rehuda Omer Misha Yadav Tzuos Yisa Es Kapav. So Rehuda taught in the Mishnah, someone who has dye on his hands should not do duchening. Tana Imrov Anshe Yir Malach Mekach Mutter. However, if a lot of people in the city are already involved in the dyeing business, then no one's going to be fazed when they see all the colors there. So if you go to the 5 towns, or you go somewhere where people like to wear lots of colored socks, maybe no one's going to be fazed when the gentlemen go up there with all sorts of fantastic colors on their socks. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Like, is this just my experience? Have you guys seen this? No.
No.
Okay, well.
Seven to 5 towns for shop.
Oh, yeah, early.
They have sock fetishes there.
Is there any chance that of overlooking certain physical ailments? We're being taught a sensitivity not to make people feel uncomfortable. There are some people who are empathetic and some who are not empathetic. And this is to make people who have physical things to feel better about, not to hurt them.
Right.
Setting an example.
Right. That's important also to recognize that, hey, this person, they're not the same as I am. They're in town over here. And I shouldn't bat an eye the same way that Yasla goes up to Duchen and Reuven goes up to Duchen. Certainly there's a need to balance these regulations also with general sensitivity and respecting everyone regardless of their physical capabilities. That's definitely true. It's a good point, Arlene.
I have to tell you that I was more likely to see
all these
colored socks in
symbols and
Bayswater than in the
symptoms
5
and
towns.
interpretation of restrictions. You can read into it, if you're aware that a lot of these things that they're saying,
Right.
how does one repress it?
Yeah. It's that's why the sages are kind of legislating for what they think most people will be thinking. But of course, with the understanding that individuals are different. That's true.
Yeah.
What was your
It's
grandfather
like
saying?
what there's a saying, the motion dictates the emotion.
Yeah. That's a fair point. It's
So that really
What did your
that's
grandfather
given me
say?
this whole feeling. I've never seen it spell out. I haven't read that clearly, but that's the impression I get.
Yeah, it says a lot of regulations on this. Zadie, you said something?
About the socks.
Oh, you have to answer
The
this.
socks. He was talking
Yes,
about
yes.
socks.
I was
I was thinking
Socks.
I should probably make a I don't know, maybe like computer hits the raise hand button. I'm not sure. I'll have to figure that one out because this happens very often.
They want to ask a question.
Yeah, well, there's a button you can hit on the computer which actually digitally raises a hand,
All right.
so that might make it a little bit cleaner. Zadie, was there something you said?
Yeah, talking about colored socks, weirdly colored socks, or blindingly colored socks. I was more likely to see it when davening in Bayswater, which is in Queens, Far Rockaway, than in davening in Cedarhurst in the Five Towns.
Well, it's all the same place at this point. It's well,
So
yeah.
two different municipalities.
Well, you down at the young Israel, and the more yeshivish elements, that's where you'll see it. Anyway, okay, so we have under 15 minutes left, so let's make sure to get this in. I will ask that any clarification questions, please do ask. Any additional ideas, we'll just pause at the end to take those things. That would make sure we can get on to 25A, onto Chafei Amud Aleph. Here we go. Final section for tonight. We're going to be talking about different things that people do that are considered forms of heresy. We talked about blasphemy just before. Now we're going to talk about heresy. Ha'omer eini over l'fnei ha'teva b'tzvonim af levanim lo yavor. So we're toward the bottom of 24b. We're at the Mishnah on the bottom of 24b. So it's toward the end. Ha'omer eini over l'fnei ha'teva b'tzvonim af levanim lo yavor. So what happened is we had a concern. The Gemara will actually tell us explicitly, but I'll spoil the surprise for you, that there are people who were insistent that they didn't want to wear colored clothing, or they didn't want to wear a sandal or to wear shoes when leading davening. So basically, back then, certain heretics, that's how they would pray. They were particular about wearing white garments when praying and also taking their shoes off. By the way, this is a difference between kind of the Western versus Middle Eastern world. In the more Western societies, it's more respectful to keep your shoes on. But you go to like the Middle East, it's considered more respectful to take your shoes off. And well, we're Middle Eastern religion. So that's why you'll see Kohanim take off their shoes when they're serving in the Beis HaMikdash. So anyway, agula sakana v'ein ba mitzvah. So if a man takes his tefillin and instead of having it as a square, makes it in a shape of a oval, of a circle, so then it presents a danger based on the shape because it kind of like can get hidden onto his head. V'ein ba mitzvah, and you've not even fulfilled the mitzvah because it's supposed to be square, as we'll see. Nasa mitzcho al fas yado harezo derech haminas. Now, the way the Tzedukim, literalists, the way they would read the Torah is that they would put tefillin between, because it says beinei necha, it's supposed to be between your eyes. So instead of putting on their forehead, which in terms of longitude is between the eyes, they also, in terms of latitude, wanted it between the eyes as well. So they would actually wear tefillin over here, which can present a danger as well. And then also for the shelyan, instead of putting it on their arm over here, they would actually put it literally on their hands, in the palm of their hands. So that's how they would wear their tefillin, which is considered heretical. Let's say you plate it with gold. You know, imagine how that could be a whole business of Judaica items out there, you know, gold-plated tefillin. So some people, they don't get gold-plated tefillin, they get like special, you know, tefillin cases instead. But let's say you plate the tefillin itself, or you put it on a sleeve. Shelo harezeh derech hachitzon. This is the way of the chitzonim. So let me just explain what that means for a moment. Rashi elaborates on this. What's the difference between minas and chitzonim? Minas means heresy. That means, Rashi says, who are heretics? Shemavaz and midrash chachamim, that they belittle the teachings of the sages. Whereas derech chitzonim is that they're not necessarily maliciously against the Jewish traditions, but they don't believe in interpreting the Torah according to our traditions. So it's a little bit less malicious, maybe just less informed. So you'll see in Sanhedrin, it talks about Sfarim Chitzonim, books. It says one of the things that keeps someone from going to the world to come to Olam Haba is reading Sfarim Chitzonim, literally books of, you know, those who are outside. So I think it's Rabbi Akiva who understands that it's referring to Ben Sira, referring to non-canonical works, the apocryphal works that did not make it into the canon of Tanakh. Some understand that it could refer to reading about different religions. Some want to understand it refers to secular literature. So I imagine we don't take that approach. Okay, so moving forward in the Gemara. Why are we concerned about someone who has who wants to wear white clothing or not wear shoes when davening, we're concerned that he's doing so for heretical reasons. Good. Next. So why would we think that someone can't wear circular tefillin? The reason is, let's say it's supported by a brisa, where the brisa says, tefillin murvos halacha Moshe miSinai, v'amarava b'tafar v'lach sonan. So tefillin have to be in a square; they can't be circular. And this is learned from a halacha Moshe miSinai. And Rava further teaches us that the way it's even stitched is like 1 finger by 1 finger, and then it's a finger and I believe 2/5 across diagonally. It needs to be a perfect square. That's how we make it. So it seems from this brisa that tefillin must be square, not circular. Amar Papa, Natsisa Davida ki amguza. So what's amguza? So Rashi tells us agulos ke'egos. Maybe our Mishnah, so basically you can have something round, but when it sits on your head, the bottom is flat. That does not present a danger. What's our Mishnah coming to tell us? Maybe our Mishnah is fine with circular tefillin in principle, but it's worried that if it's round on the bottom and you get hit on the head, it can actually make an indentation into your head. And that's what we're worried about, at least from a safety standpoint. Finally, last Mishnah, we'll just do the Mishnah, get us on to the next page. Ha'omer, this is actually a very famous Mishnah. It comes up in Brachos also, I believe. Indeed, it does. Brachos Amidal Amanav. Thank you, Mr. Sashas. Anyone who says, Yverchucha Tovim Harezo Derech Minas, or Al Kansi Bor Yagirech Amecha. Okay, so let's just break this down. So anyone who praises God, just good people should bless God. So that might be an issue because either we're saying only good people should praise God, or because it sounds like we're acknowledging that God should only be praised for the good that he does, but we shouldn't acknowledge God for when bad things happen as well. So that's considered heretical. The Gemara will elaborate on this as well. And when it says, wow, Hashem, you have mercy on the bird's nest by making us send away the mother bird before taking the eggs. If you praise God for commanding us that, also heretical. Same idea, that if you praise God only on the good, and if you say modim twice. Remember we talked about not repeating words during davening a long time ago. We had a share on this one, I believe.
Mm.
So the issue of saying modim twice is that it's a form of heresy, because back in the day they had the Zoroastrianism. They believed that there was a God of good and a God of evil. Anything good in this world was because of one deity, anything evil was because of the other deity. We believe in one God who creates the potential for good and evil and gives us the power to choose. So to say modim sounds like you're acknowledging 2 different gods instead of one God. So meshakenoso, we silence such a person. Also, hamachana ba'araya is meshakenoso. Someone who is mechan, who makes a kinoi. So what does this mean? When it comes to some of the sins in the Torah, this is what many of the early Christians did. I guess Christians today also, where they didn't like some of the prohibitions in the Torah. So what they did was, instead of understanding them as the Torah says, like don't do this, they said, well, the Torah is just teaching us about a general value or a metaphor. So what they would do is, some people would say all the list of different sexual prohibitions in the Torah, they would say, God didn't really mean that. God just meant, so the example that Rashi gives us here is, it says, where is it? It says, I'm not finding it here, but essentially it says that one's not supposed to reveal the nakedness of their father. So, the understanding there is that a son is not supposed to have relations with a woman who had relations with his father, because that's considered to be a disgrace to him. So one might say, it doesn't really mean that. The Torah says, live and let live. It just means that there's any secrets, you shouldn't say anything disgraceful to your father. But the Torah is just using allegory. So anyone who tries to sit now, the Torah gives us laws, and there are generally overarching principles and values that we're supposed to derive from the laws. But deriving overarching values is not to the detriment of the actual laws in the Torah. You can't just ignore the laws. Basically, if you look historically, any major breakoff from mainstream Judaism makes that argument. You look at the Korach movement. The Korach movement said, well, you don't really need tchelas because it's really just about thinking about God. So I have a blue garment, then I don't need to wear tchelas on my tzitzis. And then, you know, you go to the Jesus movement and you go throughout the ages to some modern day breakoffs from mainstream Judaism. I don't want to get in trouble for calling out specifics, but you can think of it yourself, who basically make the argument that it's about Jewish values. The issue is that when you don't have the law and you just believe only and solely in Jewish values is oftentimes not Jewish values, but your values, which you put under the guise of Jewish values. Because if you're not actually following the Torah, you're just following what you want the Torah to say without actually looking at the text. Okay, I'll get off the soapbox. Finally, however, so the final example that's given in the Mishnah is that it says, you shall not give over your children to Molech. You shouldn't. One of the forms of worship back then was that they had this fire god Molech. They passed their own children through the fire as an offering to Molech. So one might say, now this is going in the direction of stringency. It's not just teaching us that you shouldn't sacrifice your children to Molech, but it's teaching us that you shouldn't even give any of your seed to a non-Jewish woman. And so you're basically mixing up, you're mixing up there's different punishments for each. So then you're mixing up the laws of the Torah again by over applying the principles from them. So anyway, this is what my Rebbe Rosalewski always say. There's kind of sheer material, and then there's like the Saturday morning sermon material. There's like hermeneutics and homiletics, and it's important not to mix up the two of those. All right. Shkoyach again. I want to take a quick photo actually, just for our
we did one.
let me just get a quick photo just for all those. You can reopen your Gemara for a second, but just it's honest because we actually work on it. Okay.
He's also a director.
Do you guys want to look around? Okay, so remember, this is kind of like a crystal knot thing, so smile, but not too widely, if that makes sense. Okay. Great job, everyone. All right, thank you so much, folks on Zoom. Thank you so much it's really beautiful that we have this new room for learning Torah, and we've like maxed out the capacity here tonight. And thank you for coming to commemorate Kristallnacht. And God willing, we should be able to gather around this table for regular and happy occasions as well. So,
And you will continue with Zoom